Billionaire took his daughter to the doctor and discovered that the pediatrician was his ex-fiancée. What she did next? A great love story. Hi, my beautiful, precious, great and loving family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Let me start with a prayer straight from my heart. O Lord, heal me with your mercy and bless every soul watching this. Protect their homes, fill their hearts with peace. Amen. Though I'm still recovering, your love is my strength. You're more than subscribers. You're my heartbeat, my home. We're not just a channel, we're a real family. To all our amazing new members, welcome home. Please introduce yourself in the comments. I want to know you. Now, something I must share. We had 2 technical errors, one with noise, another with silence, and YouTube is pushing us down. But haven't we all been there? When life hits us twice and tries to break us? But we rise, together, with faith and love. If you see my content on other channels, please know, they're not me. They're stealing our stories. This is the only real Mr. Peter channel. Please protect it. One small request before we start. Please like, comment, and don't leave the story halfway. If the intro is long, skip it but stay for the story. Your love keeps us alive. If you are still with me, comment down, I am with Mr. Peter. Now, I hand you over to James, here with today's story, full of love, truth, and warmth.
Some moments arrive like lightning, sudden, blinding, and powerful enough to split your world in 2. Joe Rob's world fractured the instant his 6-year-old daughter, Stacy, collapsed during her ballet recital, her tiny body crumpling like a delicate flower, crushed by an invisible hand. One moment she was spinning across the stage in her pink tutu, her face glowing with the pure joy that only children possess, and the next, she lay motionless on the polished wood floor while 300 parents gasped in collective horror. "Daddy, I can't breathe," she had whispered against his chest as he carried her from the theater, her usual vibrant voice now barely a thread of sound. Those 4 words launched Joe into a nightmare he thought he'd left behind when his wife Rebecca died 2 years ago. Not again. Not his baby girl. Not the only light left in his carefully controlled universe. Now, racing through the midnight streets of Manhattan in his Bentley, Joe pressed the accelerator harder, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. In the back seat, Stacy lay pale and still, her breathing shallow and irregular. The family doctor had taken one look at her and immediately called ahead to Mount Sinai's pediatric emergency department. "Get her there now," Dr. Morrison had said, his usually calm demeanor cracking. "Don't stop for anything." Joe had built an empire worth billions, had commanded boardrooms and negotiated deals that moved markets. But none of that mattered now. He was just a terrified father, helpless against whatever was stealing the breath from his daughter's lungs. The hospital's emergency entrance blazed with fluorescent light as Joe screeched to a halt. Within seconds, a team of nurses surrounded them, lifting Stacy onto a gurney with practiced efficiency. Joe ran alongside them through the corridors, his expensive Italian shoes sliding on the waxed floors as he tried to keep up. "Sir, you'll need to wait here," a nurse said gently but firmly as they approached the trauma bay doors. "The doctor will update you as soon as possible." "No." Joe's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm not leaving her." "Mr. Robb," a crisp, professional voice cut through his panic, "I'm the attending physician. You can observe from there, but please stay out of our way." Joe looked up to respond and felt the earth shift beneath his feet. Dr. Jennifer Nelson stood in the doorway of the trauma bay, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her brown eyes focused and alert. She wore blue scrubs and a white coat, a stethoscope draped around her neck like a badge of honor. She looked exactly as she had 12 years ago and completely transformed. This was the woman who had vanished from his life without explanation, leaving behind only a hastily scrawled note and a diamond ring on his kitchen table. For a heartbeat, time stopped. The beeping monitors, the urgent voices of the medical team, the antiseptic smell of the hospital. Everything faded except the impossible reality of Jennifer standing 3 feet away from him. Her eyes widened slightly when she recognized him, but her professional mask never slipped. "Let's get her into trauma, too," Jennifer said to her team, her voice steady despite the tremor Joe caught in her hands. "I need a full cardiac workup, stat." Joe followed them into the trauma bay, his mind reeling. Of all the hospitals in New York, of all the doctors who could have walked through that door, it had to be her. The woman who'd once promised to love him forever, who'd planned their future with the same meticulous care she now applied to saving his daughter's life. Jennifer moved around Stacy with fluid grace, her hands gentle but sure, as she began her examination. "What's her name?" she asked Joe without looking at him directly. "Stacy," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. "Stacy Elizabeth Robb. She's 6. "Hello, Stacy," Jennifer said softly, leaning over the child. "I'm Dr. Nelson. I'm going to figure out why you're not feeling well, okay? Can you tell me where it hurts?" Stacy's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Jennifer's kind face. "My chest feels funny," she whispered, "like there's a bird trapped inside trying to get out." Jennifer smiled, the same warm, luminous smile that had once lit up Joe's entire world. "That's a very good way to describe it, sweetheart. We're going to help that bird find its way out." As Jennifer worked, Joe watched her with a mixture of wonder and anguish. She'd always wanted to be a doctor, had dreamed of helping children. During their medical school days together, she'd talked endlessly about pediatric medicine, about making a difference in young lives. Seeing her now, fully realized in her calling, was both beautiful and heartbreaking. "I need to get some pictures of Stacy's heart," Jennifer explained, preparing the ultrasound equipment. "This won't hurt, but it might feel a little cold." Joe moved closer to the bed, taking Stacy's small hand in his. "Daddy's right here, baby girl. This nice doctor is going to help you feel better." Jennifer's eyes met his for just a moment over Stacy's body, and Joe saw something flicker there: surprise, pain, recognition, and something else he couldn't name. Then she turned back to the monitor, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There," she murmured, pointing to the screen. "Do you see that, Stacy? That's your heart beating. It's working very hard right now, maybe a little too hard." Joe strained to understand what he was seeing on the monitor, but the images meant nothing to him. Jennifer's expression, however, told him everything. The slight tightening around her eyes, the way her lips pressed together. He'd seen that look before when she was worried, but trying not to show it. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Jennifer glanced at the other medical staff, then moved closer to Joe. "Stacy has a condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy," she said in a low voice. "It means the muscle of her heart has become thickened, which makes it harder for the heart to pump blood effectively." Joe's world tilted. Will she be okay?" "It's manageable," Jennifer said carefully, "but she'll need surgery to correct it. Tonight." The word surgery hit Joe like a physical blow. "How dangerous is it?" For the first time since entering the room, Jennifer's professional composure wavered slightly. "I'll be performing the procedure myself," she said. "I specialize in pediatric cardiac surgery. Stacy will be in excellent hands." Joe stared at her, processing the impossible irony. The woman who'd broken his heart was now going to save his daughter's life. "Jennifer," he began, then stopped, unsure what to say. "Dr. Nelson," she corrected gently but firmly. "We need to prep her for surgery immediately. The surgical team is already assembling." As the nurses began preparing Stacy for transport to the operating room, Joe leaned down to kiss his daughter's forehead. "I'll be right here when you wake up," he promised. "Doctor Nelson is going to take very good care of you." Stacy's eyes found Jennifer again. "You have pretty eyes," she said sleepily as the pre-medication began to take effect. "They look kind, like Mommy's did." Jennifer's breath caught, and for a moment, her professional mask slipped entirely. Joe saw tears gather in her eyes before she blinked them away. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. "I promise I'll take very good care of you." As they wheeled Stacy toward the operating room, Jennifer paused beside Joe. "The waiting room is down the hall," she said. "Surgery will take several hours. I'll update you as soon as I can." "Jennifer," Joe said again, his voice breaking slightly on her name. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a moment he saw the woman he'd loved so desperately, the woman he'd planned to marry, the woman who'd disappeared like smoke. "I know," she said quietly. "I know this is complicated, but right now, the only thing that matters is Stacy." Joe nodded, unable to speak. Jennifer turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the corridor as she disappeared behind the operating room doors, taking his daughter and his carefully buried past with her. Alone in the bright, sterile hallway, Joe Robb, billionaire and master of his universe, sank into a plastic chair and buried his face in his hands. 12 years ago, Jennifer Nelson had walked out of his life and nearly destroyed him. Tonight, she might be the only person who could save what mattered most to him in the world. Some moments arrive like lightning, he thought again, and sometimes they strike twice. Chapter 2. The Price of Silence. The steady beep of surgical monitors was the only sound in the operating room as Jennifer Nelson made the first incision, her hands moving with the precision that had made her one of the most sought-after pediatric cardiac surgeons on the East Coast, and the only barrier between Joe Robb's daughter and the darkness that had already claimed too many young hearts. But tonight, as she worked to repair the thickened muscle around Stacy's tiny heart, Jennifer found herself fighting two battles, one to save the child on the table, and another against the memories that Joe's presence had unleashed like a dam bursting after years of careful containment. "BP is holding steady," called out her surgical nurse. "Heart rate stable." Jennifer nodded, her focus laser-sharp despite the chaos in her mind. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd dedicated her life to after. She pushed the thought away. Not now. Not when a 6-year-old's life hung in the balance. Through the observation window, she could see Joe pacing in the hallway, his tall frame silhouetted against the fluorescent lights. Even after 12 years, she knew his every gesture. The way he ran his hands through his dark hair when he was anxious, the way his shoulders carried the weight of the world. He'd built an empire since she'd known him. That much she'd gleaned from business magazines and newspaper articles she'd pretended not to read. But success hadn't changed the fundamental core of who he was, a man who loved fiercely and protected what mattered to him with everything he had, just like he'd tried to protect her all those years ago. "Jenny, whatever's wrong, we can fix it together," he'd said that awful morning when she'd tried to leave without explanation. That's what people who love each other do. They face things together. But some things couldn't be fixed. Some losses were too devastating to share. Dr. Nelson, the voice of her resident, Dr. Peterson, pulled her back to the present. "The septal myectomy is complete. Would you like to inspect the repair?" Jennifer examined her work through the surgical scope, satisfied with the precision of the cut she'd made to remove the excess heart muscle. "Perfect. Let's close her up." As she began the careful process of suturing the tiny incision, Jennifer's mind drifted back to that night 12 years ago, the night that had changed everything and set her on this path of healing other people's children because she'd failed so catastrophically to protect her own family. It was supposed to be the happiest night of her life. She and Joe had just gotten engaged that afternoon, and her friends had thrown an impromptu celebration at their favorite restaurant near campus. She'd been showing off her ring, planning their future, talking about the pediatric residency she'd just been accepted to, and the life they were going to build together. She'd been drunk on happiness and maybe a little bit on champagne when her phone rang at 11:30 p.m. Unknown number. She'd almost ignored it, but something made her step outside into the cool Chicago air and answer. "Is this Jennifer Nelson?" The voice was official, distant. "Yes. Ma'am, I'm Officer Rodriguez with the Chicago Police Department. I'm calling about your brother, Atlas Nelson. There's been an incident." The world had stopped spinning. Atlas, her baby brother, who was only 19 and trying so hard to stay out of trouble in their old neighborhood. Atlas, who called her every week to tell her how proud he was that she was going to be a doctor. Atlas, who was supposed to walk her down the aisle since their father had died when they were children. "What kind of incident?" she'd whispered. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to inform you that your brother was fatally shot tonight during what appears to have been a gang-related altercation. He was found at approximately 10:15 p.m. I'm very sorry for your loss." The phone had slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the sidewalk. Through the restaurant window, she could see Joe laughing with their friends, his face lit up with the joy she'd just seen shatter into a million pieces. While she'd been celebrating her engagement, planning her perfect future, her little brother had died alone on a street corner, bleeding out while she'd been too selfish and too drunk on her own happiness to even answer his calls. She tried calling Atlas back, looking at her phone's call log. 3 missed calls. 3 times he'd reached out to her while she'd been ignoring her phone, too caught up in her own joy to be there when he needed her most. "Dr. Nelson, we're ready to close," Dr. Peterson said, and Jennifer realized she'd been standing motionless for several seconds, lost in the past. Of course, proceed with closure. As her team finished the surgery, Jennifer watched Joe through the window. He'd stopped pacing and was now sitting with his head in his hands, probably praying to whatever God he believed in to spare his daughter. She wanted to go to him, to tell him Stacy was going to be fine, to explain why she'd left him and beg his forgiveness for the pain she'd caused. But she'd made her choice 12 years ago, and some decisions couldn't be undone. After the phone call, she'd stumbled back into the restaurant, grabbed her coat, and mumbled something about a family emergency. Joe had immediately offered to come with her, to help her through whatever was wrong. But she'd refused. How could she explain that while he'd been sliding a ring onto her finger, promising her forever, her brother had been calling for help that never came? She'd driven to the hospital where Atlas had been taken, though she knew it was too late. The doctors confirmed what the police officer had already told her. Atlas Nelson, age 19, had died from multiple gunshot wounds. Gang-related violence. Wrong place, wrong time. All the cliches that were supposed to make sense of senseless loss. She'd stood over his body in the morgue, this boy she'd helped raise after their mother died. This young man she'd been so proud of for staying in school and staying out of trouble, and she'd known with crystal clarity that she didn't deserve the happiness Joe offered. She'd failed in the most fundamental way. She hadn't protected her family. What right did she have to build a new one? "Surgery complete," Jennifer announced as the final suture was placed. "Let's get her to recovery." As they wheeled Stacy's small form toward the post-operative unit, Jennifer finally allowed herself to step out of the OR. Joe was on his feet immediately, his face etched with worry and exhaustion. "How is she?" he asked, his voice rough. "The surgery was successful," Jennifer said, slipping back into her professional persona like armor. "We removed the excess heart muscle that was causing the problem. She'll need to stay in the ICU for monitoring, but I expect a full recovery." Joe's knees actually buckled with relief. "Thank God. Thank you, Jennifer. I don't know how I can ever— It's Dr. Nelson, she corrected gently. And it's my job, nothing more. But even as she said the words, she knew they were a lie. This had been everything more than just her job. Can I see her? In a few minutes. She's still unconscious from the anesthesia, but you can sit with her. As they walked toward the ICU, Dr. Keturah Whitmore fell into step beside Jennifer. Keturah had been Jennifer's colleague and closest friend for 8 years, one of the few people who knew about Jennifer's carefully guarded past. That was beautiful work in there, Keturah said quietly. Textbook perfect. Thank you. Want to tell me why you look like you've seen a ghost? Jennifer glanced at Joe, who was walking slightly ahead of them, his entire focus on getting to his daughter. Not now, Keturah. Jennifer. Keturah's voice was gentle but firm. I've never seen you that shaken during a surgery, and the way you're looking at that man, she paused. He's not just any patient's father, is he? Jennifer stopped walking, letting Joe continue toward the ICU alone. We knew each other, a long time ago. Knew each other, or loved each other. Trust Keturah to cut straight to the heart of it. Jennifer had always admired her colleague's directness, her ability to see through pretense and evasion. It was what made her such an excellent doctor and such a dangerous friend. It doesn't matter now, Jennifer said. What matters is that his daughter gets the care she needs. Does it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like it matters quite a lot. Keturah studied Jennifer's face. How long has it been since you've seen him? 12 years. 12 years. Keturah let out a low whistle. And he just happened to bring his daughter to our ER tonight. That's either the biggest coincidence in the world, or the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Through the ICU window, they could see Joe sitting beside Stacy's bed, holding her tiny hand in both of his. Even unconscious, Stacy looked more peaceful than she had hours earlier, her color better, her breathing easier. She's going to be fine, Jennifer said, more to herself than to Keturah. The repair was clean, no complications. She'll live a completely normal life. And what about you? Keturah asked. What kind of life are you going to live now that the past has walked back through your door? Jennifer didn't answer. She couldn't because she didn't know. For 12 years, she'd built her existence around routine, around saving other people's children, around the careful emotional distance that allowed her to function without feeling too much. Joe's presence threatened all of that, reminded her of the woman she'd been before. Grief and guilt had reshaped her into someone who helped heal others but couldn't heal herself. I need to check on my other patients, she said, turning away from the window. Jennifer. Keturah's voice stopped her. Whatever happened between you two back then, whatever made you walk away, maybe it's time to forgive yourself. Jennifer looked back at the window one more time. Joe was talking to Stacy even though she couldn't hear him, his voice low and soothing. This was the man she'd once loved with every fiber of her being, the man she'd hurt beyond measure because she'd thought she was protecting him from her pain. Now his daughter's life was in her hands, and she couldn't help but wonder if this was some kind of cosmic test, a chance for redemption, or just another opportunity to fail the people she cared about most. Some things can't be forgiven, she said quietly, and walked away before Keturah could respond. But as she made her rounds checking on her other young patients, Jennifer couldn't shake the image of Joe holding his daughter's hand, or the way his eyes had looked when he'd recognized her. There had been hurt there, yes, and confusion. But underneath it all, she'd seen something that terrified her more than any surgical complication. There had been hope. After all these years, after all the pain she'd caused, Joe Robb still looked at her like she was someone worth hoping for. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Chapter 3. The Unraveling Begins. 3 days after surgery, Stacy Robb opened her eyes and asked the question that would unravel 12 years of carefully constructed walls. Dr. Jennifer, why do you look sad even when you're smiling? Jennifer paused in her examination of Stacy's surgical site, her stethoscope hanging forgotten around her neck. In all her years of pediatric medicine, children had asked her countless questions about their conditions, about medical procedures, about why she didn't have kids of her own. But no child had ever looked at her with such clear, unclouded perception and seen straight through to the hurt she'd spent over a decade learning to hide. "I'm not sad, sweetheart," Jennifer said gently, resuming her examination. "I'm just concentrating on making sure you're healing properly." But Stacy's dark eyes, so much like her father's, remained fixed on Jennifer's face with the unsettling wisdom that sometimes emerged from children who had faced their own mortality. "My mommy used to look like that sometimes before she got really sick. Daddy said she was trying to be brave for me." The innocent observation hit Jennifer like a physical blow. She glanced toward the window where Joe stood watching them, his expression unreadable. He'd barely left the hospital since the surgery, sleeping in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, despite Jennifer's assurances that Stacy was recovering beautifully. His dedication to his daughter was absolute, unwavering, and it reminded Jennifer painfully of the kind of father he would have been to their children if she'd stayed. "Your daddy's right," Jennifer said carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups do hide their feelings to protect the people they love." "Is that why you left my daddy?" Stacy asked with the devastating directness only children possessed. Jennifer's hands stilled completely. "What?" "He talks about you sometimes when he thinks I'm sleeping," Stacy continued matter-of-factly. "He says your name like it hurts. Like when I say Mommy's name and feel sad and happy at the same time." Joe stepped forward quickly. "Stacy, honey, Dr. Nelson is here to help you get better, not to answer personal questions." But Jennifer found herself unable to dismiss the child's question as easily as her father had. Something about Stacy's earnest expression, her genuine curiosity mixed with concern, broke through Jennifer's professional defenses. "Your daddy and I knew each other a long time ago," she said softly. "Sometimes people have to make difficult choices, even when those choices hurt." "Did you choose wrong?" Stacy asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jennifer looked at Joe, seeing her own pain reflected in his eyes. Had she chosen wrong? She'd spent 12 years telling herself she'd done the noble thing, the selfless thing, protecting Joe from her damaged, grief-stricken family. But looking at him now, seeing the successful, caring man he'd become despite her abandonment, she wondered if her choice had been less about protecting him and more about protecting herself from the risk of loving and losing again. "I don't know," she answered honestly, surprising herself. "But what I do know is that you need to focus on getting strong enough to go home with your daddy." As if summoned by the mention of home, Jennifer began humming unconsciously while she checked Stacy's chart, an old melody that had once been their song, something Joe used to play on his guitar during their medical school study sessions. The tune was hauntingly beautiful, a classical piece he'd discovered and claimed reminded him of the way she moved when she thought no one was watching. Joe's sharp intake of breath made her realize what she was doing. Their eyes met across Stacy's bed, and for a moment 12 years collapsed into nothing. She was 24 again, in love and planning a future that seemed guaranteed. He was the man who'd known exactly how she liked her coffee, who'd rubbed her shoulders during grueling study sessions, who'd proposed to her with a ring he'd saved for 6 months to buy. "You still remember it," he said quietly. Jennifer stopped humming abruptly, her cheeks flushing. "I should check on my other patients." "Doctor?" "Jennifer," Stacy called as Jennifer reached the door. "Will you come see me tomorrow?" Jennifer hesitated. Stacy's recovery was progressing perfectly. There was no medical reason for daily visits. Any of her residents could handle the follow-up care. but something in the child's hopeful expression, or perhaps the way Joe was looking at her with a mixture of longing and resignation, made her nod. "I'll see you tomorrow, Stacy." In the hallway, Jennifer nearly collided with Dr. Aurora Blackwood, the chief of pediatric surgery and Jennifer's mentor for the past 8 years. Aurora was a formidable woman in her 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, who'd taken Jennifer under her wing when she'd arrived at Mount Sinai as a fellow, broken and determined to lose herself in work. "Jennifer, I need to speak with you," Aurora said, her tone brooking no argument. "My office. Now." Jennifer followed Aurora to her spacious office overlooking Central Park, knowing she was about to face the one person who might actually be able to see through her carefully maintained facades. "Sit," Aurora commanded, settling behind her massive desk with the authority of someone who'd been breaking barriers in medicine long before it was fashionable. "Now, tell me about the Robb case." Stacy Robb, age 6, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, successfully repaired via septal myectomy, Jennifer recited clinically. "Excellent prognosis for full recovery." "That's not what I'm asking about, and you know it." Aurora leaned back in her chair, studying Jennifer with the intensity that had made her legendary in pediatric surgery. "I've watched you perform hundreds of operations, Jennifer. I've never seen you shake during a procedure." "I didn't shake." "Your hands trembled when you made the initial incision. Dr. Peterson mentioned it to me. He was concerned." Aurora's expression softened slightly. "I've also never seen you make personal visits to a patient's room 3 times a day when there's no medical necessity for it." Jennifer felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I want to ensure she's healing properly." "You want to see her father?" The statement hung between them like an accusation. Jennifer opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. Aurora had been more than a mentor to her. She'd been the closest thing to a mother figure Jennifer had allowed into her life since she'd lost her own family. If anyone deserved the truth, it was this woman who'd helped rebuild her from the ashes of her old life. "Joe Robb and I were engaged 12 years ago," Jennifer said quietly. "I left him without explanation the night before our engagement party." Aurora nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "And now?" "Now nothing. I'm his daughter's doctor. That's all." "Is it?" Aurora stood and moved to the window, her hands clasped behind her back. "Jennifer, in the 8 years I've known you, I've watched you build walls around yourself that would make a medieval fortress jealous. You've dedicated your life to healing other people's children, while refusing to build any meaningful personal connections of your own. My personal life isn't the issue here, isn't it?" Aurora turned back to face her. "You're one of the most brilliant surgeons I've ever worked with. You could have your pick of positions anywhere in the world, but you've stayed here in this hospital, working yourself to exhaustion, avoiding any situation that might require you to be vulnerable." Jennifer stood abruptly. "Aurora, I appreciate your concern, but—" "Sit down." The command was delivered with the authority of decades in medicine, and Jennifer found herself obeying. "I'm not finished. When you first came here, you were running from something. I never asked what, because I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. But watching you these past few days, seeing the way you look at that man—" Aurora shook her head. "Whatever you're running from, it's still chasing you, and it's keeping you from living." Silence stretched between them. Through the window, Jennifer could see the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the park, where families were walking with their children. Couples were holding hands. People were living the kinds of normal lives she'd convinced herself she didn't deserve. "I had a brother," Jennifer said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus. He was 19 when he died, shot in a gang altercation while I was celebrating my engagement. I was supposed to protect him, and I failed." Aurora's expression grew gentle. "Oh, my dear girl. Joe doesn't know. I never told him why I left. I just—" Ran. I thought he was better off without me, without my grief and guilt and the mess my family had become. Jennifer wiped at her eyes, annoyed by the tears she'd thought she'd finished shedding years ago. But seeing him again, seeing the kind of father he is, you're wondering if you made the right choice. I'm wondering if I made the choice at all, or if I just took the coward's way out. Aurora returned to her chair, leaning forward with the intensity that made her such an effective mentor. Jennifer, I'm going to tell you something I learned the hard way. Grief doesn't make us unworthy of love. It makes us human. Loss doesn't disqualify us from happiness. It helps us appreciate it when it comes. But what if I hurt him again? What if I'm not capable of— What if you are? Aurora interrupted. What if, instead of focusing on all the ways you might fail, you considered the possibility that you might actually deserve a second chance? Meanwhile, 3 floors below in the hospital cafeteria, Joe Robb sat across from his business partner and oldest friend, Caspian Reynolds. They'd known each other since college, had built their technology empire together, and Caspian was one of the few people who knew about Jennifer and the engagement that had ended in heartbreak. "You look like hell," Caspian observed, studying Joe's exhausted features. "When's the last time you slept in an actual bed?" "Stacy needed me here." Joe stirred his coffee absently, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Stacy's recovering beautifully. The nurses told me she's asking for chocolate ice cream and complaining about the hospital gown. That's hardly the behavior of a child who needs round-the-clock parental supervision." Joe finally looked up, meeting his friend's knowing gaze. "It's her, Caspian." "Her? Jennifer. Dr. Nelson. She's Jennifer." Caspian sat back in his chair, letting out a low whistle. "The Jennifer? The one who— The one who left me, yes." Joe ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Caspian recognized from their college days when Joe was stressed beyond measure. "Of all the hospitals in New York, of all the doctors who could have treated Stacy, what are the odds?" Caspian shook his head. "How are you handling this?" "I don't know. She saved my daughter's life, Cass, performed a perfect surgery, and Stacy adores her. But every time I look at her, I remember what it felt like to wake up and find her gone. The note she left just said she wasn't ready for marriage, that she needed time to figure out what she wanted." Joe's voice grew rough. 12 years, and I still don't understand what happened." "Have you asked her?" "She won't talk to me about anything personal. It's strictly professional. Mr. Robb this and patient confidentiality that. But sometimes I catch her looking at me, and I see something in her eyes." "What?" Joe was quiet for a long moment. "Pain. Like she's hurting as much as I am, but for reasons I don't understand." Caspian leaned forward. "Joe, I've watched you build an empire, negotiate with world leaders, command rooms full of people who hang on your every word. But I've never seen you truly happy. Not since she left." "I was happy with Rebecca," Joe protested, though even to his own ears it sounded half-hearted. "You were content with Rebecca. You cared about her, respected her, built a life with her. But you were never happy the way you were with Jennifer. Rebecca knew it too." The truth of that statement hit Joe like a physical blow. Rebecca, sweet and understanding Rebecca, had known she was marrying a man who'd given his heart to someone else. She'd never complained, never demanded more than he could give, but on her deathbed, she'd looked at him with eyes that held both love and sorrow. "If something happens to me," she'd whispered during one of her last lucid moments, "don't spend the rest of your life grieving. Find your way back to happiness, Joe. Find your way back to her." "What am I supposed to do, Cass?" She made it clear 12 years ago that she didn't want the life we'd planned. Now she's Stacy's doctor, and I have to see her every day, but she won't even acknowledge what we once meant to each other. "Maybe," Caspian said carefully, "she's as scared as you are." Before Joe could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Stacy's nurse. "Your daughter is asking for you, and she wants to know if Dr. Jennifer can read her a story." Joe showed the message to Caspian, who smiled. "Looks like someone else has an opinion about this situation." As Joe headed back to Stacy's room, he found himself thinking about his daughter's earlier questions and Jennifer's humming that old melody. For the first time in 12 years, he began to wonder if the story he'd told himself about Jennifer's departure was missing crucial chapters. Maybe it was time to start asking the right questions. Maybe it was time to stop protecting himself from the answers. Chapter 4. Small Cracks in Strong Walls. At 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday, with rain pattering against the hospital windows and the world reduced to the soft beep of monitors and whispered conversations at the nurses' station, Jennifer Nelson found herself doing something she hadn't done in over a decade, letting someone see her without her armor. It started with a complication. Nothing serious, but enough to require Stacy to remain in the hospital for an additional night of monitoring. A slight irregularity in her heart rhythm that was probably nothing but could be something. The kind of medical gray area that demanded caution over convenience. "I'm staying," Joe had announced when Jennifer explained the situation that afternoon. "I don't care if you have to bring in a cot or if I have to sleep in this chair. I'm not leaving her." Jennifer had started to argue. Hospital policy, visiting hours, the fact that Stacy was stable and in no immediate danger. But something in Joe's eyes had stopped her. This wasn't the commanding billionaire or the concerned parent. This was a man who'd already buried one person he loved and would move heaven and earth to prevent it from happening again. So she'd arranged for a cot to be brought in, had the nurses provide extra blankets, and told herself she was simply accommodating a worried father. She definitely wasn't creating opportunities to see Joe Robb again. Now, 12 hours later, she was making her fourth unnecessary check on Stacy since her shift had officially ended at 6 p.m. The child was sleeping peacefully, her color good, her vital signs stable. There was absolutely no medical reason for Jennifer to be here, except for the man sitting in the chair beside the bed, reading quietly by the light of a small lamp, occasionally reaching out to smooth his daughter's hair with a tenderness that made Jennifer's chest ache with memories of how gentle his hands could be. "How is she?" Jennifer asked softly, stepping into the room. Joe looked up and she saw the exhaustion in his face, not just from the past few days, but something deeper, older. Sleeping soundly. The nurse checked on her about an hour ago. He paused. "You don't need to keep coming by. I know your shift ended hours ago." "I wanted to make sure." Jennifer. The use of her first name spoken in that familiar low tone stopped her mid-sentence. "It's almost 3 in the morning. You should be home, sleeping in your own bed." She should be. Any rational person would be. But standing here in the dim light, listening to the quiet rhythm of Stacy's breathing and seeing Joe's rumpled shirt and worried eyes, Jennifer found herself remembering what it felt like to care about someone's well-being more than her own comfort. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, settling into the visitor's chair on the opposite side of Stacy's bed. "I kept thinking about her heart rhythm. The irregular beats. They're not uncommon after this type of surgery. Usually resolves within 24 to 48 hours. She studied the monitor displaying Stacy's vital signs. "But I've learned to trust my instincts when something doesn't feel right." Joe watched her for a long moment. Is that what this is? Medical instinct? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them seemed quite ready to address directly. Jennifer focused on Stacy's peaceful face, so young and innocent, unaware of the complicated history swirling around her hospital bed. "She asked me today why I left you," Jennifer said quietly. Joe's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet room. "She's 6. She doesn't understand." She understands more than you think." Jennifer finally looked at him. "She said you talk about me sometimes when you think she's sleeping, that you say my name like it hurts." Joe was quiet for so long that Jennifer wondered if he was going to respond at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Do you know what the worst part was? Not the broken engagement, not having to cancel the wedding, not even losing you." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "It was not knowing why, spending months, years, wondering what I'd done wrong, what I could have said or done differently." Jennifer felt tears gather in her eyes. "Joe, I blamed myself for a long time. Thought maybe I'd pushed too hard, moved too fast. Maybe you felt trapped or pressured." He ran his hands through his hair. "I read that note you left probably 1,000 times, looking for clues I might have missed. I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, too small for the magnitude of pain she'd caused. "I never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me, and then you disappeared so completely it was like you'd never existed. No forwarding address, no mutual friends who knew where you'd gone. It was like you'd been erased from the world." Jennifer closed her eyes, remembering those dark months after Marcus's death, when she'd purposely severed every connection to her old life, including Joe. She transferred to a different medical school, moved across the country, changed her phone number. She'd burned every bridge that might have led him back to her because she'd believed, with the certainty of grief and guilt, that she was saving him from her brokenness. "I went to California," she said finally. "Finished medical school at UCSF, did my residency there. I thought you were better off without me." "Better off?" Joe's voice was incredulous. "Jennifer, I was going to marry you. I loved you more than I'd ever loved anything in my life. How could you possibly think I was better off?" "Because I was broken," she wanted to say. "Because my brother died while I was celebrating our engagement. Because I couldn't protect the person I loved most, so how could I ever deserve to love someone else?" Instead, she said, "I was young and scared, and I made a terrible decision." "What were you scared of?" The question hit too close to the truth she'd spent 12 years avoiding. Jennifer stood abruptly, moving to the window where she could see the city lights blinking in the darkness. "It doesn't matter now. It was a long time ago. It matters to me." She heard him stand, felt him move closer until he was standing just behind her. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence, smell the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the coffee he'd been drinking. "I married Rebecca 2 years after you left," he said quietly. "She was kind and patient and everything a man should want in a wife." Jennifer's reflection in the window revealed her wince. "Joe, you don't need to. I never loved her the way I loved you." The simple statement hit her like a physical blow. She turned to face him, seeing the raw honesty in his eyes. "She knew it too," Joe continued. "Never said anything, never complained, but I could see it sometimes in the way she looked at me, like she was grateful for whatever pieces of my heart I could give her, but she knew someone else owned the rest." "That's not fair to her memory," Jennifer whispered. "No, it's not. But it's the truth. Rebecca deserved better than a husband who was still in love with someone else. And maybe if I'd been brave enough to fight for you instead of accepting your decision, things would have been different for all of us." Joe ... She started to speak, to tell him about Marcus, about the guilt that had driven her away and kept her running all these years. But before she could find the words, a small voice from the bed interrupted them. "Daddy?" They both turned to see Stacy sitting up, her dark hair mussed from sleep, her eyes wide with confusion and something that looked like fear. "I'm right here, baby girl." Joe was at her side immediately, gathering her into his arms. "What's wrong?" "I had a bad dream," Stacy said, her voice small and shaky. "I dreamed that Dr. Jennifer went away and never came back, and you were sad like you used to be before Mommy died." Jennifer felt her heart break a little at the child's words. Without thinking, she moved to the other side of the bed, her hand instinctively reaching out to smooth Stacy's hair. "I'm right here, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" The word hung in the air like a challenge. Jennifer looked at Joe over Stacy's head, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. This wasn't just about a scared child anymore. It was about the family they might have been, the life they'd lost, and the impossible question of whether some chances could ever be reclaimed. "I promise I'll take care of you until you're all better," Jennifer said carefully. It wasn't the promise Stacy wanted. They all knew that. But it was all Jennifer could offer, at least for now. As they settled Stacy back to sleep, both adults remaining close until the child's breathing evened out again, Jennifer became aware of someone watching them from the doorway. Tallulah Morgan, her physician assistant, stood in the entrance with a knowing expression on her face. Tallulah was brilliant and intuitive, the kind of medical professional who could read situations almost as well as she could read EKGs. She'd worked with Jennifer for 3 years and had never seen her display this level of personal investment in a patient's family. Jennifer joined Tallulah in the hallway, leaving Joe to sit with his daughter. "Don't say it," Jennifer said before Tallulah could speak. "Say what?" "That I've never seen you check on a patient 4 times in one evening when there's no medical necessity? Or that you and that man look at each other like you're both drowning and the other person is a life preserver?" "Tallulah. Or maybe I should mention that you've been humming for the past 3 days, which is something you never do, and you've actually smiled, really smiled. More in the past week than in the entire time I've known you." Jennifer sighed. "It's complicated. The best things usually are." Tallulah's expression grew gentle. "Dr. Nelson, I don't know what happened between you and that man, but I can see what's happening now. And what's happening now looks like 2 people who belong together, finally finding their way back to each other." "We don't belong together," Jennifer protested. "We're different people than we were 12 years ago. Too much has happened. Too much time has passed." "Has it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you two still fit together like pieces of a puzzle." Tallulah glanced back toward the room where Joe was softly singing a lullaby to Stacy. "That little girl in there has been through more than any child should have to handle. She lost her mother, nearly lost her life, and now she's looking at you like you might be the answer to prayers she didn't even know she was praying. I'm her doctor. You're more than that, and we both know it." Tallulah placed a gentle hand on Jennifer's arm. "Sometimes the universe gives us second chances, Doctor. Nelson, the question is whether we're brave enough to take them." As Tallulah walked away, Jennifer stood in the hallway, listening to Joe's quiet voice singing to his daughter, and wondering if courage was something that could be learned, or if it was something you either had or didn't. Through the doorway, she could see them together, father and daughter, a small family that had found its way to her operating table and, somehow, into the carefully guarded chambers of her heart. Stacy was right, they did look like happiness, like the kind of simple, profound joy she'd convinced herself she didn't deserve. But maybe, just maybe, 12 years of self-imposed exile had been punishment enough. Maybe it was time to consider the possibility that some walls were meant to have cracks in them, and that love, real, deep, transformative love, had a way of finding those cracks and growing through them like flowers through concrete. As she finally headed home in the early morning hours, Jennifer found herself humming that old melody again, the one Joe used to play on his guitar when they were young and in love, and believed the future was something they would build together. For the first time in 12 years, she let herself wonder what that future might look like if she were brave enough to stop running from it. Chapter 5. Threads of Memory. Children have a way of asking the questions adults spend years avoiding, which is exactly what happened when Stacy Robb looked up from her hospital breakfast and asked her father, "Daddy, are you going to marry Dr. Jennifer?" Joe nearly choked on his coffee. Stacy, sweetheart, doctor. Jennifer is just helping you get better. That's what doctors do. But you love her, Stacy said with the matter-of-fact certainty that only 6-year-olds possess. I can tell by the way you look at her. It's the same way Prince Eric looks at Ariel in my movie. Joe set down his coffee cup, studying his daughter's face. Stacy had always been perceptive, but her recent brush with mortality seemed to have sharpened her awareness of the adult world around her. She saw things, understood connections that most children her age would miss. What makes you think that, baby girl? You smile different when she's here. Like from inside. Stacy took a bite of her pancakes, considering her words carefully. And she looks at you like Mommy used to look at the pictures of her daddy who died before I was born, sad and happy at the same time. The observation hit Joe like a lightning bolt. Rebecca's father had died in a car accident when she was 16, and Joe had seen her study old photographs with exactly that expression: love mixed with loss, joy shadowed by regret for time that could never be recovered. It's complicated, Stacy. That's what grown-ups always say when they're scared. She reached for his hand with the wisdom of someone who'd learned early that life was fragile and precious. But Mommy told me before she went to heaven that scared doesn't mean you shouldn't try. It just means something is really important. Joe squeezed her small fingers, marveling at how this little person could see so clearly through the complications adults created for themselves. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't usually listen. Stacy grinned, and Joe saw Rebecca's smile in their daughter's face, but also something else, something that reminded him of the way Jennifer had looked when she was planning their future together. So are you going to ask her? Ask her what? To be my new mommy. The simple words carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken hopes and fears. Joe looked at his daughter, this brave, beautiful child who'd survived heart surgery and the loss of her mother, who saw love where adults saw only obstacles, and realized she was asking for something he'd thought was impossible until a few days ago. I don't know if Dr. Jennifer wants to be anyone's new mommy, he said carefully. Then you should ask her. That's what you taught me. If you want to know something, you ask. Later that morning, after Jennifer had made her rounds and declared Stacy ready for discharge, Joe found himself standing in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, staring at Rebecca's headstone with words he'd never thought he'd need to say. I'm sorry, Becca, he whispered to the marble marker that bore his wife's name and the inscription, Beloved Wife and Mother. I'm sorry I never loved you the way you deserved to be loved. The October wind rustled through the maple trees, sending red and gold leaves spiraling around the quiet grave. Joe had come here every month since Rebecca's death, usually bringing Stacy so she could talk to her mother and leave small drawings or wildflowers. But today he'd come alone, needing to have a conversation that was 12 years overdue. She's back, Becca. Jennifer. I know you remember me talking about her. Probably more than I should have. Joe sank down onto the small bench beside the grave, feeling the weight of years of unspoken guilt. You were dying, and I was holding your hand, and you told me to find my way back to happiness. You said to find my way back to her. A couple walked past in the distance, holding hands and speaking in quiet tones. Somewhere a dog barked, and the sound of traffic from the street beyond the cemetery walls provided a steady backdrop to Joe's confession. I tried to love you completely, Becca. I really tried. But you were right. Part of my heart was always somewhere else, with someone else. And now Stacy's asking if I'm going to marry Jennifer, and I don't know what to tell her because I don't know if it's even possible. He pulled a photo from his wallet, one of the few pictures he had of himself and Jennifer together, taken at a medical school party just a few weeks before their engagement. They were laughing at something off camera, his arm around her waist, her head tilted toward his shoulder. They looked impossibly young and completely certain that their love could conquer anything. "Look at us," he said, showing the photo to Rebecca's headstone. "We thought we had forever figured out, and maybe we would have if she hadn't gotten scared and run away. But I never fought for her, Becca. When she left, I just accepted it. I let her go and married you, and we built a good life together. But it wasn't the life I was meant to live." The admission felt both liberating and devastating. Joe had spent years telling himself that his marriage to Rebecca had been a choice based on mature love, practical compatibility, shared values. But the truth was simpler and more painful. He'd married Rebecca because she was safe, because she represented a future that didn't require him to risk the kind of soul-deep vulnerability that Jennifer had demanded. "Stacy sees it, you know, sees right through me like you always did. She wants Jennifer to be her new mommy, and the terrible thing is, I want that too. I want it so much it scares me." Joe traced Rebecca's name on the headstone with one finger. "But what if I hurt Jennifer again? What if I hurt Stacy? What if I'm not capable of the kind of love they both deserve?" A gentle breeze stirred the leaves around his feet, and Joe could almost hear Rebecca's voice in the rustling branches. "Stop being afraid, Joe. You've wasted enough time." Meanwhile, across town in a modest apartment on the Upper West Side, Jennifer sat in a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and old books, trying to explain to the woman who'd saved her life why she was falling apart all over again. Aletha Whitmore was 73 years old, with silver hair and keen brown eyes that had seen Jennifer through medical school, residency, fellowship, and every crisis in between. She'd been Jennifer's anatomy professor during her first year at UCSF, but more importantly, she'd been the one to find Jennifer crying in the library stacks 3 weeks after she'd fled New York, and she'd become the mother Jennifer had lost too young. "You're humming again," Aletha observed, setting a cup of tea in front of Jennifer. "That old melody you used to sing when you were studying for finals." Jennifer stopped mid-hum, startled. "I didn't realize I was doing it." "It's the song he used to play for you, isn't it? The young man you were engaged to before you came to California." Jennifer had told Aletha about Joe, but only in the vaguest terms: a broken engagement, a decision to start over somewhere new. She'd never revealed the full truth about Marcus's death, or the guilt that had driven her across the country. "His name was Joe," Jennifer said quietly. "Is Joe. He's—" She struggled to find words that could encompass the impossibility of the situation. "His daughter was my patient. Heart surgery. She's going to be fine, but seeing him again has brought back feelings you thought you'd buried." "I don't know what I thought." Jennifer wrapped her hands around the warm teacup, seeking comfort in its heat. Maybe that 12 years was long enough to forget someone, that I'd moved on, built a life, become someone different. Aletha studied her with the patience of someone who'd spent decades helping young people navigate their confusion. "But you haven't forgotten him." "No. And you're not someone different. You're still the woman who loved him enough to run away rather than burden him with your pain." Jennifer's head snapped up. "How did you—" "My dear girl, I've been watching you build walls around your heart for 12 years. I've seen you dedicate your life to healing other people's children while refusing to consider having any of your own. I've watched you maintain careful distance from every person who might matter to you." Aletha stood and moved to a cabinet, returning with a wooden box Jennifer recognized with a shock of memory. "You didn't run away from him because you stopped loving him. You ran away because you loved him too much to let your grief destroy his future." Aletha opened the box, revealing dozens of letters, some sealed, some torn open, all addressed to Joe Robb in Jennifer's careful handwriting. Letters Jennifer had written during her first year in California, pouring out her heart on paper, but never having the courage to send. "You kept them," Jennifer whispered. I kept them because someday I knew you'd be ready to understand what they really say. Aletha pulled out one of the letters, its envelope yellowed with age. This one's dated 6 months after you arrived in San Francisco. Would you like me to read it to you? Aletha, I don't think... But Aletha was already unfolding the letter, and Jennifer found herself listening to her own words from 12 years ago. Dear Joe, I know I have no right to write to you after what I did, but I need you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done. I need you to know it wasn't about you or us or the love we shared. That love was the most real thing in my life, and I destroyed it because I was too afraid to let you see how broken I was. My brother Marcus died the night we got engaged, and I couldn't bear the thought of bringing that darkness into your light. You deserved someone whole, someone who could give you the family and future you dreamed of. I hope you found her. I hope you're happy. I hope you've forgotten me because one of us should be free from this pain. All my love always, Jennifer. Tears were streaming down Jennifer's face by the time Aletha finished reading. She'd forgotten how raw those early letters had been, how desperately she'd wanted to reach out to Joe while simultaneously believing she was protecting him by staying away. There are 47 letters in this box, Aletha said gently. 47 times you tried to explain, to apologize, to find your way back to him. And not once, not in a single letter, do you sound like someone who made the right choice. But I did make the right choice, Jennifer protested weakly. He went on to build a successful life, got married, had a daughter. He was fine without me. Was he? Because from what you've told me about seeing him again, he doesn't sound like a man who was fine. He sounds like a man who spent 12 years wondering what he'd done wrong. Jennifer closed her eyes, remembering the pain in Joe's voice when he'd talked about not knowing why she'd left, about blaming himself for her departure. His daughter asked him if he was going to marry me, she said suddenly. Aletha raised an eyebrow. And what did he tell her? I don't know, I wasn't there. Jennifer laughed shakily. But she has this way of seeing right through adult complications. She asked me yesterday why I look sad even when I smile. Smart child. Too smart. She's been through so much. Lost her mother, nearly died herself. But she still believes in happy endings. She still thinks love can fix everything. Can't it? The question hung in the air between them. Jennifer looked at the box of unsent letters, evidence of a love she'd tried to bury but never quite managed to kill. She thought about Joe's hands gentle on his daughter's hair, about the way he'd looked at her in the quiet hospital room, about Stacy's innocent question about new mommies and second chances. I don't know, Jennifer said finally. I've spent so long believing I didn't deserve a happy ending that I don't know how to imagine one anymore. Then maybe, Aletha said, closing the box of letters, it's time to stop trying to imagine it and start living it instead. That evening, Jennifer returned to her own apartment with Aletha's words echoing in her mind. She stood in her living room, looking at the carefully arranged space she'd created, beautiful, orderly, and utterly empty of the messy complications that came with letting people matter too much. For 12 years, this had been enough. Work, routine, the satisfaction of saving children's lives, the controlled distance that kept her safe from the kind of loss that had shattered her world when Marcus died. But now, thinking about Joe's eyes and Stacy's questions and the family they might have been, Jennifer found herself wondering if safety was worth the price she'd paid for it. Her phone buzzed with a text message from the hospital. Stacy Robb discharged successfully. Follow-up appointment scheduled for next week. Thank you for exceptional care. J. Robb. Professional. Polite. Exactly the kind of message she should want from a patient's father. Instead, she found herself staring at those two simple initials and remembering a time when Joe's text messages had ended with "love you" and "can't wait to see you" and "forever. Remember, Jennifer walked to her bedroom and opened her jewelry box, pulling out the item she'd hidden at the very bottom, wrapped in tissue paper and untouched for over a decade. The engagement ring Joe had given her glittered in the lamplight, its diamond catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows across her walls. She'd kept it all these years, telling herself she'd return it someday, knowing she never would because giving it back would mean having a conversation she wasn't ready for. But maybe, just maybe, she was finally ready to stop running from the conversations that mattered most. Maybe it was time to find out if some loves were strong enough to survive 12 years of silence, guilt, and self-imposed exile. Maybe it was time to discover whether a 6-year-old's faith in happy endings was stronger than a grown woman's fear of losing them. Chapter 6. Unexpected Bridges. Sometimes fate has a sense of humor so twisted it borders on cruel, which is exactly what Jennifer thought when she received an emergency call to Riverside Prep Academy, asking her to provide medical clearance for Stacy Robb's field trip because the child's regular pediatrician was unavailable. Dr. Nelson, we have 17 children scheduled for the Natural History Museum tomorrow, and insurance requires current medical clearance for any child with a cardiac history. Mr. Robb specifically requested you, the school nurse had said. Jennifer had wanted to say no. She'd spent the past week trying to maintain professional distance, even assigning Dr. Peterson to handle Stacy's routine care. But the thought of disappointing Stacy and Joe's specific request had overridden her careful self-preservation. The nurse's office was a far cry from the sterile hospital environment Jennifer was accustomed to, decorated with cheerful posters about healthy eating and hand-washing, a small cot covered with a colorful quilt, and a desk cluttered with the detritus of daily childhood injuries and illnesses. "Dr. Nelson," Stacy's voice rang out as Jennifer entered the office, and the child launched herself from a chair into Jennifer's arms with the unconscious affection of someone who'd claimed her as family. "You came?" "Of course I came," Jennifer said, hugging Stacy back and marveling at how natural it felt to hold this child, how right it seemed to have small arms wrapped around her neck and feel the warm weight of complete trust. "I needed to make sure you're strong enough for your museum adventure." "I am. I feel perfect. My chest doesn't hurt at all anymore, and I can run really fast now. Want to see?" "Maybe we should save the running demonstration for after I check your heart." Jennifer laughed and realized with a start that she was laughing, really laughing, something she couldn't remember doing in months. As Jennifer examined Stacy, she heard adult voices in the hallway, well-dressed parents clearly discussing Joe. "Is that Joe Robb, the tech billionaire? Very single and very handsome," one woman was saying. Jennifer found herself straining to hear while trying to focus on Stacy's heartbeat, which sounded strong and steady. "All done," Jennifer announced. "Your heart sounds perfect, Stacy. You're cleared for all activities." "Including sleepovers?" "Including sleepovers." Jennifer was packing up when Joe's voice filled the hallway. "Mr. Robb," the nurse's voice was bright. "Dr. Nelson is just finishing up." Joe appeared in the doorway, dressed casually in dark jeans and navy sweater. "Dr. Nelson, thank you for coming on such short notice." "It wasn't any trouble. Stacy's cleared for the field trip." "Daddy, can Dr. Jennifer come to lunch with us?" Stacy bounced between them. "I want to show her the monkey bars." Joe's eyes met Jennifer's. "I'm sure Dr. Nelson has other patients to see." "Actually, I'm between appointments this afternoon," Jennifer heard herself saying. 20 minutes later, Jennifer sat on a playground bench, watching Joe push Stacy on the swings, while other families played around them. "Higher, Daddy," Stacy called out. "Any higher and you'll fly away," Joe replied, giving her another push. Jennifer watched them and felt something warm and dangerous shift in her chest. This was Joe as a father, gentle, devoted, completely focused on his daughter's happiness. "Dr. Jennifer, watch this," Stacy called out, then jumped from the swing at its peak, landing hard and immediately crying out in pain. Both adults reached her simultaneously, Joe scooping her up as Jennifer knelt to assess the injury. "My ankle," Stacy whimpered through tears. Jennifer's training kicked in, her hands gentle but thorough. "Minor sprain. Nothing broken, but we need ice." "I'll call Dr. Morrison," Joe said, pulling out his phone. "No need. I can handle this." Jennifer lifted Stacy into her arms. "I have supplies in my car." Around them, other parents watched with interest, their whispered speculation obvious. "Is that his girlfriend?" she heard someone say. "Look how natural she is with the child." Jennifer tried to ignore the comments as they reached her car. She settled Stacy in the back seat with her ankle elevated and an ice pack applied. "Better?" Jennifer asked, smoothing Stacy's hair. "Much better. You're really good at taking care of people." "That's my job, sweetheart. It's more than your job. You love it." "I can tell." Joe stood beside the car, his expression filled with gratitude and something deeper. "Thank you, Jennifer, for everything. It's Dr. Nelson, and it's just a sprained ankle. That's not what I meant." Before Jennifer could ask what he did mean, a grinding noise from Joe's car interrupted them. His BMW was making the sound of an engine giving up entirely. "Perfect timing," Joe said wryly as steam rose from under the hood. "I can drive you home," Jennifer offered impulsively. "Jennifer, you don't need to." "It's no trouble." In her car, with Joe beside her and Stacy chattering from the back seat, Jennifer felt surrounded by an intimacy that made her chest ache with possibilities she'd trained herself not to consider. "Doctor, Jennifer, do you like music?" Stacy asked. "I do." "What kind do you like?" "Everything." "But Daddy plays guitar, and he knows the most beautiful song. He played it for Mommy when she was sick." Jennifer's hands tightened on the wheel. Joe had gone very still. "It goes like this," Stacy continued, humming a melody that made Jennifer's world tilt. It was their song, the piece Joe had composed for her during medical school, the melody she'd been unconsciously humming for weeks. "Don't you think it's pretty, Doctor?" "Jennifer?" Jennifer couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Joe's eyes were on her, sensing her shock. "It's very beautiful," she managed. The rest of the drive passed with Stacy's innocent chatter, but Jennifer was acutely aware of Joe beside her, his familiar scent, the way he tapped rhythms on his knee, the careful way he avoided looking at her after the song incident. At his building, a doorman appeared to help with Stacy. "Thank you," Joe said as they transferred Stacy from the car, "for everything today." "It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing." His hand briefly touched hers. "It was everything." "Dr. Jennifer," Stacy said, balancing on one foot, "will you come up and see my room? I drew you a picture of my heart after surgery." Jennifer knew she should refuse, should maintain boundaries that were already dangerously thin. Instead, she heard herself saying, "I'd love to see your room, Stacy." As they entered the building, Jennifer caught her reflection in the lobby mirrors and barely recognized the woman looking back, her face soft with something that looked suspiciously like happiness. For the first time in 12 years, Jennifer Nelson was allowing herself to imagine what it might feel like to belong somewhere, to someone, and the possibility terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Chapter 7. Breaking Points. The white roses were her undoing, 12 perfect blooms that caught the afternoon light and scattered rainbows across her desk like promises of beauty in a world she'd convinced herself was meant to be gray. "Dr. Nelson," Tallulah's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Robb is here to see you. He says it's not about Stacy's medical care." Jennifer stared at the roses with Joe's card. "For the woman who saved my daughter's life and reminded me what it feels like to hope." J. She'd been expecting this since yesterday, when she'd spent 2 hours in Joe's apartment, sharing dinner with him and Stacy like a family. Send him in. Joe entered carrying another bouquet, white roses again, the same flowers he'd brought on their first date 12 years ago. Hello, Jennifer. He looked nervous, she realized. Joe Robb, billionaire CEO, was nervous about asking her out. Joe, if this is about Stacy's follow-up care, it's not about Stacy. He set the roses beside the first arrangement. It's about us. There is no us. Isn't there? Yesterday felt like us, sitting in your car, having dinner at my apartment, watching you help her with homework, like you'd been doing it her whole life. Jennifer moved to the window, looking out at the city instead of Joe's face, which showed her too much. Yesterday was about Stacy's medical care. Her ankle was fine, and we both know it. Joe's reflection appeared beside hers. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm asking you to have dinner with me, a chance to talk. Nothing's happening between us. Look at me and say that. She couldn't. She couldn't look into those eyes and tell him she felt nothing. Joe, please, just leave it alone. I can't leave it alone. Not anymore. His voice was quiet but determined. I've spent 12 years trying to leave it alone, trying to forget you, trying to build a life that didn't have this gaping hole where you used to be. And then you walked back into my world and saved my daughter's life and made me remember what it felt like to be whole. Jennifer closed her eyes, fighting against the pull of his words, the way they seemed to wrap around her heart and squeeze. We're different people now, Joe. Too much has happened. Too much time has passed. Are we? Because when I look at you, I see the same woman I fell in love with. The same brilliant, compassionate, beautiful woman who used to make me believe anything was possible. That woman doesn't exist anymore. She does. I saw her yesterday with Stacy. I saw her in the hospital when you were fighting to save my daughter's life. I see her right now, standing here trying to convince herself she doesn't deserve to be happy. The accuracy of his observation hit her like a physical blow. Jennifer turned from the window, finally meeting his eyes, and saw her own pain reflected there. What do you want from me, Joe? I want you to stop running. I want you to give us a chance to figure out what we could be now, today, as the people we've become. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made Jennifer's breath catch. I want you to know that I kept this for 12 years, hoping someday I'd have the courage to offer it to you again. Her engagement ring, the symbol of everything they'd lost, everything she'd thrown away in her grief and fear. Joe, don't. I'm not proposing, he said quickly. I'm just showing you that some things are worth holding on to, even when they seem impossible. Even when the person you love disappears without explanation and breaks your heart so completely, you think you'll never recover. I can't, Jennifer whispered, backing away from him. I can't do this. Can't do what? Have dinner with me? Talk about what went wrong 12 years ago? Or can't admit that you still feel something for me? All of it. The words exploded from her with a force that surprised them both. I can't have dinner with you because I can't trust myself not to want more. I can't talk about what went wrong because some things can't be fixed. And I can't admit I still feel something for you because feeling something means risking everything all over again. Joe stared at her, his face a study in confusion and hurt. Risking what, Jennifer? What are you so afraid of losing that you'd rather live in this self-imposed isolation than take a chance on being happy? The question broke something open inside her, and suddenly she was 12 years in the past, standing over Marcus's body in the morgue and feeling her world shatter into pieces she'd never quite managed to put back together. You don't understand, she said, her voice shaking. You think this is about us, about what we had, but it's not. It's about the fact that I'm not capable of protecting the people I love. I couldn't protect Atlas, and I won't be responsible for destroying you and Stacy, too. Who's Atlas? The question hung in the air between them, and Jennifer realized she'd said too much, revealed the wound she'd spent over a decade keeping hidden. It doesn't matter. It does matter. Everything about you matters to me, even the parts you won't let me see. Joe moved closer, his voice gentle. Jennifer, whatever happened 12 years ago, whatever made you leave, we can work through it together. No, we can't. Jennifer moved to her office door, opening it in a clear dismissal. Some things can't be worked through. Some people are just broken, Joe, and I'm one of them. Please go. Joe looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the exact instant when his patience finally ran out, when the hope in his eyes transformed into something harder. You're right, he said quietly, picking up his roses from her desk. You are broken, but not in the way you think. You're not broken because something bad happened to you 12 years ago. You're broken because you've convinced yourself that running away is the same thing as being strong. The words hit her like a slap, and Jennifer felt tears gather in her eyes. You don't get to judge me, she said. I'm not judging you. I'm calling you a coward. Joe paused at the door, his expression sad rather than angry. The Jennifer I fell in love with was brave enough to fight for what she wanted. But the woman standing here now is so afraid of being hurt that she'd rather hurt herself, and everyone who loves her, than take the risk of living. After he left, Jennifer stood in her office, surrounded by the lingering scent of white roses and the echo of words that felt like prophecy. She made it through the rest of her appointments on autopilot, her professional mask firmly in place, her hands steady despite the chaos in her heart. But at home that evening, alone in her carefully ordered apartment with its neutral colors and surfaces free of personal mementos, Jennifer finally allowed herself to fall apart. She found herself on her kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, sobbing with a grief that felt as fresh as the day Marcus died. Joe was right. She was a coward. She'd spent 12 years hiding behind the nobility of sacrifice when the truth was simpler and uglier. She was terrified of loving someone enough to be destroyed by losing them again. Through her tears, she found her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in months. Jennifer? Dr. Rosalind Pierce's voice was warm with surprise and concern. Honey, what's wrong? Rosalind had been Jennifer's closest friend during medical school at UCSF, the only person who'd known about Marcus's death and Jennifer's flight from New York. She was a psychiatrist now, practicing in San Diego, with 2 children and a husband who adored her. She was everything Jennifer might have been if she'd been brave enough to choose healing over hiding. He's back, Roz, Jennifer said through her tears. Joe's back and I'm falling apart all over again. Oh, sweetheart, tell me what happened. Jennifer poured out the whole story. Stacy's surgery, the forced proximity, the dinner at Joe's apartment, the roses and the proposal of a second chance she'd rejected out of fear. And he called me a coward, she finished. Said I was broken because I'd convinced myself that running away was the same as being strong. Rosalind was quiet for a long moment. Jen, I love you like a sister, so I'm going to tell you something that might be hard to hear. What? He's right. The words hit Jennifer like a physical blow. Ross, no, listen to me. I've been your friend for 15 years, and I've watched you build a beautiful, meaningful career helping children. You've saved countless lives, made an enormous difference in the world, but you've never let yourself be happy. Not once. I am happy. Your work is your hiding place. It's noble and important, but it's still a hiding place. Rosalind's voice was gentle but firm. Jen, Marcus didn't die so you could spend the rest of your life alone. He died because sometimes terrible things happen to good people. Period. End of story. But if I'd been there, you might have died too. Or you might not have been able to change anything. You'll never know, and torturing yourself with what-ifs isn't honoring his memory. It's wasting the life he would have wanted you to live. Jennifer closed her eyes, feeling the truth of those words settle into the places where she'd been carrying guilt for so long. I'm scared, Ross. Of course you're scared. Love is terrifying. It means giving someone the power to destroy you and trusting them not to use it. But the alternative, what you've been doing for 12 years, isn't living. It's just existing. What if I hurt them? What if I'm not capable of being what they need? What if you are? What if, instead of focusing on all the ways you might fail, you considered the possibility that you might actually deserve happiness? The question echoed what Aurora had said, what Aletha had implied, what everyone who cared about her had been trying to tell her for years. Meanwhile, across town in a bar that catered to Manhattan's financial elite, Joe Robb sat across from his younger brother Felix and tried to explain why he felt like he'd just lost Jennifer all over again. Felix Montclair, he'd taken their mother's maiden name when he'd pursued his music career, was everything Joe wasn't. Artistic, emotional, unafraid of vulnerability. He was also the only person in the world who knew the complete truth about Joe's first engagement and the devastation that had followed. So you brought her flowers and asked her to dinner, and she completely shut down, Felix summarized, signaling the bartender for another round. Worse than shut down. She looked at me like I was asking her to jump off a cliff. Joe rubbed his temples, feeling the headache that had been building since he'd left Jennifer's office. And she mentioned someone named Marcus. When I asked who he was, she completely panicked. Marcus, Felix mused. That's a new name in the Jennifer saga. Any idea who he might be? None. But whatever happened to him, it's connected to why she left. I could see it in her face, this flash of pain that looked like it was going to kill her. Felix studied his brother with the perception that came from years of reading people's emotions through their music. You know what I think? What? I think she's been in love with you for 12 years, just like you've been in love with her. And I think that terrifies her more than anything else in the world. Joe looked up from his drink. What makes you say that? Because nobody runs that hard from something that doesn't matter. The way you've described her reactions, the panic, the walls, the desperate need to push you away. That's not indifference, Joe. That's someone who's so afraid of being hurt that she'd rather hurt herself first. So what am I supposed to do? Stop chasing her. Joe stared at his brother. What? Stop chasing her. Stop trying to convince her to give you a chance. Stop bringing her flowers and asking her to dinner and making her feel like she has to choose between loving you and protecting herself. But if I don't fight for her, then you give her the space to fight for herself, to decide that she's tired of running, tired of being afraid, tired of living half a life. Felix leaned forward. Joe, you can't save her from whatever's keeping her locked in the past. Only she can do that. All you can do is be there when she's ready to stop running. And if she's never ready? Felix was quiet for a moment, considering. Then at least you'll know you gave her the choice instead of trying to make it for her. As the brothers sat in contemplative silence, both thinking about love and loss and the courage it took to risk everything for someone who might not be ready to risk anything in return, Jennifer was sitting on her kitchen floor, still on the phone with Rosalind, finally beginning to understand that the prison she'd been living in had only one lock, and she was the one holding the key. The question was whether she was finally brave enough to use it. Chapter 8. When Children Lead Hearts. Out of the mouths of babes comes truth that adults spend lifetimes avoiding, which is exactly what happened when Stacy Robb looked up from her coloring book and asked, Dr. Jennifer, why are you and Daddy being so silly about loving each other? Jennifer nearly dropped her stethoscope. She'd been examining Stacy's surgical site, healing beautifully, while maintaining the professional distance she'd rebuilt after Joe's devastating visit 3 days earlier. "Sweetheart, I'm not sure what you mean," Jennifer said carefully, avoiding Joe's eyes. "You both get the same look when you think the other isn't watching," Stacy continued with relentless logic. "Like when I look at chocolate cake and know I shouldn't eat it, but really want to." Despite everything, Jennifer felt her lips twitch. "And what look is that?" "Hungry, but also scared. Like you're afraid the cake might disappear if you try to eat it." Joe made a sound that might have been laughter or despair. "Stacy, honey, grown-up relationships are complicated. That's what you always say when you don't want to explain something." Stacy set down her crayon with serious expression. "But I figured it out anyway." "Figured what out?" Jennifer asked. "You were Daddy's first family, before me and Mommy. That's why he gets sad sometimes, and that's why he knows that song that makes him happy and sad." The innocent observation hit Jennifer like a blow. She glanced at Joe and saw her shock reflected in his face. How had this 6-year-old pieced together the truth? "Stacy," Joe began, but his daughter wasn't finished. "And Doctor." "Jennifer, you need a family too. I can tell because you save everyone else, but nobody saves you." Stacy's voice grew softer. "That's why you look tired even when you smile. Mommy used to look like that." Jennifer felt tears gather. "Stacy, I have a very good life. I help children get better. But who takes care of you when you're sad? Who hugs you when you have bad dreams?" The questions exposed the careful loneliness Jennifer had constructed. This child saw through all her defenses to the fundamental truth. She'd built a life around caring for others, while allowing no one to care for her. "I take care of myself," Jennifer said weakly. "That's not the same thing." Stacy moved to stand in front of Jennifer, her small hands touching Jennifer's face with startling gentleness. "Daddy's been sad since before Mommy died. And you've been sad for even longer, haven't you?" Jennifer couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. "But you don't have to be sad anymore," Stacy continued with absolute certainty. "Because now we found each other again. That's how it works in the best stories. People get lost, but then they find their way back home." "Stacy," Joe's voice was rough with emotion. "Doctor, Jennifer, and I, things aren't that simple." "Why not?" Stacy turned to face her father. "You love her. She loves you. I love both of you. That sounds pretty simple to me." "Adults have a lot of history, baby girl. Sometimes things happen that make it hard to go back to the way things were." "Then don't go back," Stacy said with the brilliant simplification that only children could manage. "Go forward. Make a new story that's even better than the old one." After the appointment ended and Jennifer had scheduled Stacy's next follow-up, she found herself alone in her office, staring at the medical chart and thinking about the wisdom that had just come from a 6-year-old's mouth. "You save everyone else, but nobody saves you." The truth of it was staggering. Jennifer had built her entire adult life around healing others, around being the strong one, the reliable one, the doctor who never faltered in a crisis. But she'd never allowed anyone close enough to offer her the same care she gave so freely to others. 3 floors down, in the hospital's business center, Joe was having a revelation of his own as his assistant, Imogen Beauregard, presented him with a folder of newspaper clippings she'd found during what she diplomatically called background research. "Mr. Robb, I hope you don't mind, but after our conversation about Dr. Nelson, I did some looking into her background. I thought it might help you understand." Imogen trailed off, her usual professional composure wavering. "I found something I think you need to see." Joe opened the folder and felt his world shift on its axis. The headline from the Chicago Tribune, dated 12 years ago, made his blood run cold. "Teenager killed in gang violence. Brother attending medical school." The article was brief, clinical in its recounting of facts. Atlas Nelson, 19, shot and killed at 10:15 p.m. during what police described as gang-related violence. Survived by his sister Jennifer Nelson, 24, a medical student at Northwestern University. The date of Atlas's death burned itself into Joe's consciousness. October 15th, the same night he'd proposed to Jennifer. The same night she'd been celebrating their engagement while her brother was dying on a street corner across the city. "My God," Joe whispered, understanding flooding through him with the force of revelation. She wasn't running from me. She was running from the guilt. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place with devastating clarity. Jennifer's sudden withdrawal, her refusal to explain, her complete disappearance from his life. It hadn't been about their relationship at all. It had been about a 19-year-old boy who'd died while his sister was planning her future. About survivor's guilt so crushing, it had driven her to sacrifice everything she loved, rather than risk failing to protect someone again. "There's more," Imogen said quietly, pointing to another article. The follow-up story mentions that Ms. Nelson had changed her medical school placement and left Chicago entirely. No forwarding address. Joe leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling. For 12 years, he'd believed Jennifer had simply decided she didn't want the life they'd planned together. He'd blamed himself, questioned everything about their relationship, wondered what he'd done to drive away the woman he'd loved more than life itself. But the truth was infinitely more heartbreaking. Jennifer had loved him so much that she destroyed her own happiness rather than risk bringing her pain into his world. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," Joe said suddenly. "All of them, sir. And get me everything you can find about Atlas Nelson. I want to know what kind of person he was, what he meant to Jennifer, why she's been carrying this guilt for 12 years. As Imogen hurried to comply, Joe found himself thinking about Stacy's words from the morning appointment. His daughter, with her 6-year-old wisdom, had seen what he'd been too hurt and confused to understand. Jennifer wasn't broken because she couldn't love. She was broken because she loved too much, too deeply, too completely to risk losing anyone else. That evening, Joe made an impulsive decision that would have surprised anyone who knew him as the calculated, strategic businessman. He drove to Jennifer's apartment building and waited in the lobby until she came home from work, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Joe?" Jennifer stopped short when she saw him, her medical bag sliding from her shoulder. "What are you doing here?" "I know about Atlas." The color drained from Jennifer's face so quickly that Joe instinctively stepped forward, afraid she might faint. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Atlas Nelson, 19 years old, shot and killed on October 15th, 12 years ago." Joe's voice was gentle, but his words hit Jennifer like physical blows. "The same night I proposed to you." Jennifer swayed slightly, and Joe guided her to one of the lobby's chairs, kneeling beside her as she struggled to process his words. "How did you find out?" she whispered. "Does it matter?" "Jennifer, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me help you through it?" "Because you couldn't help." The words came out broken, raw with 12 years of suppressed grief. "Because I was supposed to protect him and I failed. Because while you were putting a ring on my finger and talking about our future, my baby brother was dying alone. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it?" Jennifer looked up at him with eyes full of anguish. "He called me 3 times that night, Joe. 3 times while I was at that restaurant, celebrating, ignoring my phone because I was too caught up in my own happiness to answer. Maybe if I'd picked up, maybe if I'd been there, maybe you'd be dead too." Joe reached for her hands, holding them firmly when she tried to pull away. "Jennifer, you couldn't have saved him. The only thing answering those calls would have accomplished is destroying you both. You don't understand." I understand that you've spent 12 years punishing yourself for something that was never your fault. I understand that you convinced yourself you didn't deserve happiness because you couldn't prevent a tragedy no one could have prevented. Joe's voice grew fierce with conviction. And I understand that you've been so afraid of failing to protect someone you love that you've refused to let anyone love you back. Jennifer was crying now, the kind of deep, wrenching sobs that came from years of held-back grief finally finding release. I can't, she whispered. I can't go through losing someone again. And I can't go through losing you again, Joe said quietly. But that's the risk we take when we love someone. That's what makes it worth it. He pulled her into his arms then, holding her as she cried for her brother, for their lost years, for the fear that had kept her running for so long. And as he held her, Joe finally understood what Stacy had seen so clearly. Love wasn't about being safe from loss. It was about choosing to risk everything for the chance to truly live. Marcus would have wanted you to be happy, he said into her hair. He would have wanted you to have the family you dreamed of, the life you planned. Destroying yourself doesn't honor his memory. It wastes the gift he'd want you to have. Jennifer pulled back to look at him, her face streaked with tears, but somehow lighter than he'd seen it since she'd walked back into his life. I'm scared, Joe. I know, so am I, but maybe we can be scared together this time. As they sat in the apartment lobby, holding each other and finally confronting the truth that had kept them apart for 12 years, neither of them noticed the small figure watching from the building's security desk, a certain 6-year-old who'd convinced her father's driver to make a detour on the way home from ballet class because she'd had a feeling the grown-ups might need her help figuring out what she'd known all along. Sometimes the wisest words came from the smallest voices, and sometimes love required the courage of a child to show adults how to find their way home. Chapter 9. The Price of Truth. Sometimes knowing the truth is more devastating than living with the lie, which is exactly what Jennifer discovered when she woke up the morning after Joe had held her in her apartment lobby, and realized that understanding why she'd run didn't make her any less afraid of stopping. 3 weeks had passed since that night, 3 weeks of careful, tentative reconnection that felt like learning to walk on ice. Joe had been patient, giving her space to process 12 years of buried grief while slowly rebuilding the bridge between them. They'd had coffee twice, shared lunch once, and he'd brought Stacy to the park where Jennifer had joined them for what felt almost like a family outing. But underneath every moment of tentative happiness, Jennifer carried the crushing weight of knowing that she was still the same person who'd failed to protect Marcus, the same person who might fail again. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when Dr. Aurora Blackwood called Jennifer into her office with news that would force her to confront the fundamental question she'd been avoiding. Jennifer, I have an opportunity I want to discuss with you, Aurora said, gesturing for her to sit. Johns Hopkins has offered you the position of Chief of Pediatric Cardiac Surgery. It's everything you've worked toward, your own department, unlimited research funding, the chance to build a program from the ground up. Jennifer stared at her mentor, the words not quite processing. Baltimore? Baltimore. It's a significant promotion and, frankly, you're overdue for this kind of recognition. Your work here has been exemplary, but you've been hiding behind my shadow for years. This would put you center stage where you belong. When would they need an answer? End of the week. Jennifer, this is the opportunity of a lifetime, the kind of position that comes along once in a career. Aurora studied her carefully. Under normal circumstances, I'd expect you to be packed and ready to leave tomorrow. But these aren't normal circumstances, are they? Jennifer thought about Joe, about Stacy, about the fragile something they'd been building together, about the way it felt to sit in the park watching Joe push his daughter on the swings, to share quiet dinners where Stacy chattered about school while the adults exchanged glances full of possibility, I don't know what you mean. I think you do. The question is whether you're going to run away again, or whether you're finally ready to stay and fight for what you want. That evening, Jennifer met Joe at a small restaurant in Soho, ostensibly to discuss Stacy's upcoming cardiac clearance for school sports. But the manila envelope containing the Johns Hopkins offer sat in her purse like a loaded weapon, and she could barely focus on their conversation about medical protocols and exercise limitations. "Jennifer, you're not listening to anything I'm saying," Joe said gently, reaching across the table to touch her hand. "What's wrong?" She pulled her hand away, the gesture automatic and immediately regretted. "I'm sorry. I'm just distracted by work." "Is it Stacy? Is there something about her condition?" "No, Stacy's fine. Perfect, actually. Her heart function is completely normal." Jennifer forced herself to meet his eyes. "Joe, I need to tell you something." Something in her tone made him go very still. "Okay. I've been offered a position, Chief of Pediatric Cardiac Surgery at Johns Hopkins. It's everything I've worked for." The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer watched Joe's face carefully, seeing the exact moment when he understood what she wasn't saying directly. "Congratulations," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "That's a tremendous opportunity." "It is. When would you start?" "If I accept, I'd need to relocate within the month." Joe leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "Are you going to accept?" "I don't know." The honesty slipped out before she could stop it. "I should. It's what I've been working toward my entire career. But accepting means leaving everything I've built here, everyone I've—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Everyone you've—" "What, Jennifer?" "Everyone I've come to care about." Joe was quiet for a long moment, absently turning his wine glass between his hands. "Do you remember what you said to me in your office 3 weeks ago, when I brought you the roses?" "Joe, you said some people are just broken. That you were broken." He looked up at her then, and she saw something in his eyes that made her chest tighten. "I think I finally understand what you meant. I was emotional that day. I didn't mean—" "You meant every word. And maybe you were right. Maybe you are broken, Jennifer. But not in the way you think." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're so terrified of being hurt again that you'd rather hurt yourself first. You'd rather take a job 300 miles away than risk staying here and building something real with me and Stacy. That's not what this is about, isn't it?" Joe leaned forward, his voice growing intense. "You've spent 3 weeks letting us get close to you, letting Stacy fall in love with you, letting me hope that maybe we could find our way back to each other. And the minute it starts to feel real, the minute it starts to matter, you get a convenient escape route and you're ready to take it. It's not an escape route. It's my career." "Your career has been your excuse for 12 years, Jennifer. Your reason for not getting too close to anyone, not risking too much, not letting yourself want things you might lose." Joe's voice grew quieter, sadder. "I thought we were past this. I thought finally knowing the truth about Marcus had freed us to move forward. Knowing the truth doesn't change who I am, Joe. It doesn't change the fact that I'm not capable of being what you and Stacy need. What we need? Do you know what Stacy asked me yesterday?" Joe's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "She asked if you were going to be her new mommy for real, or if you were just pretending until you got tired of us." The question hit Jennifer like a punch to the stomach. "Joe, I never meant to confuse her." "She's not confused. She's hopeful. She's 6 years old and she's already lost one mother, and she's brave enough to hope for another one." "But you," Joe shook his head, You're a grown woman who's so afraid of disappointing people that you'd rather disappoint them first, on your own terms. That's not fair. None of this is fair. It wasn't fair that Marcus died. It wasn't fair that you carried that guilt alone for 12 years. It wasn't fair that I spent all this time not knowing why you left. Joe stood up, pulling out his wallet. But what's happening now, you running away again just when we're starting to matter to each other, that's a choice, Jennifer, and it's the wrong one. Joe, wait. But he was already walking away, leaving her sitting alone at the table with the weight of truth heavy on her shoulders. Later that night, Jennifer sat in her apartment staring at the Johns Hopkins contract, trying to convince herself that accepting it was the logical choice, the safe choice, the choice that would protect everyone from her inevitable failure to be enough. Her phone rang, displaying Stacy's contact information, a photo Joe had taken of his daughter grinning gap-toothed at the camera. "Doctor, Jennifer." Stacy's voice was small, worried. "Daddy's crying." Jennifer's heart clenched. "Oh, sweetheart, did something happen?" "He's trying to hide it, but I can tell. He gets the same look he used to get when Mommy was sick, and he thought I wasn't watching." Stacy's voice grew smaller. "Did you and Daddy have a fight?" "We had a disagreement, honey. Sometimes grown-ups don't agree about things." "About you going away?" The question revealed that Stacy had heard more than the adults had realized. "How did you know about that?" "I heard Daddy talking to Uncle Felix. He said you got offered a new job far away, and he's scared you're going to take it." Stacy's voice wavered. "Are you?" Jennifer closed her eyes, feeling the weight of a 6-year-old's trust and a man's broken heart pressing down on her. "I don't know, Stacy. Will you think about staying? For me and Daddy?" "Sweetheart, it's not that simple." "It is that simple. You love us and we love you. That's all that matters." After Stacy hung up, Jennifer sat in the silence of her apartment, surrounded by the careful life she'd built to keep herself safe. On her kitchen table lay 2 pieces of paper, the Johns Hopkins contract that represented everything she'd worked for, and a photo Stacy had drawn for her after their park outing, a stick figure family labeled "Me, Daddy, and Dr. Jennifer," with a heart drawn around all 3 figures. For the first time in 12 years, Jennifer Nelson had to decide whether she was brave enough to choose love over safety, hope over fear, the messy complexity of a real family over the controlled isolation that had protected her heart, but left it empty. The choice would define not just her future, but the futures of 2 people who'd already lost too much and deserved to finally find their way home. Chapter 10. When Hearts Refuse to Surrender. Sometimes the universe conspires to make you face the truth you've been running from, which is exactly what happened when Jennifer Nelson arrived at the hospital on Friday morning to find Stacy Robbs sitting in her office, wearing her school uniform and a determined expression that belonged on someone much older. "Stacy?" Jennifer dropped her medical bag, her heart immediately jumping to worst-case scenarios. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here? Are you feeling sick? Is your chest hurting?" "I'm not sick," Stacy said calmly. "I came to talk to you about making bad choices." Jennifer blinked, processing the surreal situation of being lectured by a 6-year-old who had somehow made her way to Mount Sinai Hospital on her own. "Stacy, does your father know you're here?" I told Mrs. Patterson I needed to use the bathroom, and then I got in a cab." Stacy lifted her chin with pride. "I brought my own money from my piggy bank, and I told the driver it was an emergency." "Oh my God." Jennifer sank into her chair, her mind racing through the implications of Joe's daughter disappearing from school. "Stacy, your daddy is going to be terrified when he finds out you're missing." "Then you should call him and tell him I'm safe." Stacy climbed into the chair across from Jennifer's desk, her small feet swinging several inches above the floor. "But first, We need to talk." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Jennifer felt a smile tugging at her lips. This child, brave, determined, utterly convinced of her own rightness, was so much like her father, it took Jennifer's breath away. "What did you want to talk about?" "About you leaving us." Stacy's voice was matter-of-fact, but Jennifer could see the hurt lurking in her dark eyes. "Uncle Felix told Daddy that sometimes people leave because they're scared of staying. He said sometimes people think leaving is easier than fighting for what they want." Jennifer's chest tightened. "Stacy, are you scared of me and Daddy?" The question was asked with such innocence, such genuine confusion, that Jennifer felt tears gather in her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, no, I'm not scared of you and your Daddy." Then what are you scared of? How could she explain to a 6-year-old the complicated tangle of grief and guilt that had shaped her life? How could she make this child understand that love felt like a luxury she didn't deserve? "I'm scared of disappointing you," Jennifer said finally. "I'm scared of not being good enough to be part of your family." Stacy considered this with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice weighing constitutional law. "But what if you are good enough? What if me and Daddy already decided you're perfect for us?" "Life isn't that simple, sweetheart." "It is if you want it to be." Stacy slid off her chair and moved around the desk to stand beside Jennifer. "Dr. Jennifer, do you remember when I was in the hospital and you fixed my heart?" "Of course. You weren't scared then. You just did what needed to be done to make me better." Stacy placed her small hand on Jennifer's arm. "That's all we're asking you to do now. Fix what's broken so we can all be better." Before Jennifer could respond, her office door burst open and Joe rushed in, his face a mask of panic and relief. "Stacy, my God, when the school called and said you were missing." He swept his daughter into his arms, holding her tight. "Don't ever scare me like that again." "I'm sorry, Daddy, but I had to talk to Dr. Jennifer before she made a really big mistake." Joe's eyes met Jennifer's over Stacy's head, and she saw the question there. "The Johns Hopkins position," she said quietly. "She knows I'm considering it." "Are you considering it?" Joe's voice was carefully neutral, but Jennifer could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held Stacy like an anchor to keep himself steady. "I dot." Jennifer looked at this man and child who'd somehow become the center of her world and felt the careful walls she'd built around her heart finally begin to crumble. "I don't know." "Yes, you do," Stacy said firmly, wriggling out of her father's arms to stand between the two adults. "You know you want to stay. You know you love us. You're just scared because Uncle Marcus can't be here to meet us." Jennifer went very still. "Stacy, what do you know about Uncle Marcus?" "Daddy told me. About how he died when you were young, and it made you really sad for a long time." Stacy's voice grew gentle. "But Daddy also said that Uncle Marcus would want you to be happy, just like Mommy wants me and Daddy to be happy." The simple wisdom of it, the way this child could cut through 12 years of complicated guilt and see straight to the heart of truth, broke something open in Jennifer's chest. "Stacy's right," Joe said quietly. "Marcus would want you to be happy, Jennifer. He'd want you to have the family you've been afraid to build. But what if I fail again? What if I can't protect you both the way I should?" Joe moved closer, his hand reaching up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. "Then we'll fail together. And we'll get up and try again, because that's what people who love each other do." "I'm so scared, Joe." "I know. So am I. Loving someone means being terrified of losing them. But the alternative, living without love, that's not really living at all." Jennifer looked at them, this man who'd never stopped loving her despite 12 years of separation, this child who'd chosen her as family with the uncomplicated faith that only children possessed, and realized that Stacy was right. The choice really was simple. "I called Johns Hopkins this morning," she said quietly. Joe's face went carefully blank. "And I told them I couldn't accept the position, that I'd found something more important here." The words hung in the air for a moment before Stacy let out a whoop of joy, launching herself at Jennifer with enough force to nearly knock her over. "I knew it! I knew you wouldn't leave us!" Over Stacy's head, Jennifer met Joe's eyes and saw wonder there, and hope, and something that looked like the beginning of forever. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Jennifer, I don't want you to give up your dreams for us." "I'm not giving up my dreams, I'm choosing new ones." She stood, still holding Stacy, and moved toward Joe. "Dreams that include a brilliant man who writes beautiful songs and a remarkable little girl who's brave enough to take cabs across Manhattan to save the adults from their own stupidity." Joe reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small velvet box she'd seen in her office weeks earlier. "I've been carrying this around for 12 years, he said, "waiting for the right moment to ask you again. Joe, marry me, Jennifer. Not because it's what we planned 12 years ago, but because it's what we choose now today, as the people we've become." Jennifer looked at the ring, their ring, and felt the last of her walls finally crumble completely. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes." As Joe slipped the diamond onto her finger, Stacy clapped her hands in delight. "Now we're really a family." "We've been a family since the moment you walked into our lives," Joe said, pulling both his girls into his arms. "We just needed time to figure it out." 6 months later, Jennifer stood in a small chapel overlooking Central Park, wearing a simple white dress and holding a bouquet of white roses. In the front pew, Aletha Whitmore dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Aurora Blackwood beamed with pride. Caspian Reynolds served as Joe's best man, and Stacy, resplendent in pink silk, had insisted on being both flower girl and ring bearer. But the most important guest wasn't visible to anyone except Jennifer, a 19-year-old boy whose memory she carried in her heart, who she knew would have walked her down the aisle with joy and given his blessing to this new beginning. As Jennifer and Joe exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises to choose each other every day, to face whatever came together, to build a love strong enough to honor the past while embracing the future. Stacy stood between them, her small hands holding both of theirs. "I love you both," she whispered as they sealed their promises with a kiss. And in that moment, surrounded by the people who mattered most, Jennifer Nelson, now Jennifer Robb, finally understood that love wasn't about being perfect or protecting everyone from pain. It was about choosing to show up, choosing to stay, choosing to fight for the happiness that Atlas would have wanted her to have. Some stories end where they began, and this one had begun with love. Love interrupted by tragedy, separated by fear, but ultimately too strong to stay buried. As they walked back down the aisle together, a real family at last, Jennifer felt her brother's presence like a blessing and knew that some loves were indeed strong enough to survive anything, even 12 years of running from them. The end.